Hello, hello, hello. Today I'm talking with Karl Scotland. We talked about music, marathons, and why stuff works. How his musical career formed his style of collaborating. He also links hearing, music, and visualizing work. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello everyone, and hello Karl. Good
Hi.
evening.
Good evening, good afternoon. 4 o'clock for me, so just end of the afternoon.
And 5 o'clock on my side, or a little bit after 5 o'clock. And your and my side, let's also show this a little bit. My side, that means I'm in Belgium. So this is Ghent in Belgium. And let's ask Google to show where you are, and you're in Brighton in the UK. So indeed, 1 hour time difference. And let's bring you back on screen fully. So that shows us a little bit. I always try to show people a little bit where people are, at least at the moment of the recording, because we might still move around. Karl, for the few people that don't know you, could you, before we jump into the questions, do a quick introduction about yourself? What do you want people to know about you?
So I guess I call myself a lean agile consultant nowadays. I've been in the agile space for probably 25 years now. So I started off as a developer and then got into XP initially around about 1999 when Kant's book first came out, the first edition of Extreme Programming Explained. And that, I kind of say that kind of got me hooked on agile really. So changed my career trajectory, kind of started doing less and less programming. So I can't remember the last time I actually wrote some proper code, but kind of moved more into kind of initially team leader, project management, product management, engineering management, just kind of trying to bring the agile ideas into the teams I worked with that way, and then moved into consulting. And I think my journey's kind of just been through constantly. I know it kind of feels like every 5 or so years I discover something new. So, started off with XP, and then as the Agile Manifesto came out and Agile became a thing, it was Scrum, and then it was Kanban, and then that led me into the wider Lean community. And then at the moment nowadays, I'm kind of really interested in strategy deployment and bringing some of those ideas into the Agile world.
Yeah, because am I remembering correctly that you were in that initial meeting for where Kanban was, or the first ideas of Kanban, I think in 2007 or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, 2007 at the big Agile conference in, I think it was DC, where there was it was an open space type conference, but it wasn't open space. I can't remember what they called it, conference within a conference or something. And I really consider myself it was just serendipitous luck, really, because I think I'd gone to see another session, and then that session didn't happen. And the table next door, David Anderson was running a session on Kanban, so I just kind of wandered over and had a listen. A few of my colleagues, I was working for Yahoo at the time, they were there, and the three of us kind of went, "Oh, this is interesting. Let's all go back to our own teams at Yahoo and try some of this stuff out." So yeah, I was kind of involved in the Kanban community for the early days. We set up pretty much, in fact, I think it was during that conference week, we set up the Kanban Dev Yahoo mailing list, and the community really formed, I think, from that conference.
Yeah, but it's interesting that I saw it happening because I passed by, and I was on my way to another session, and I thought, oh, these are interesting people, I should join. I watched a little bit and I thought, no, this other session is an official session, that must be better. And I walked away, and afterwards like, yeah, that was probably not the smartest move that I did. But yeah, that's a little bit how
yeah,
like you say,
never
it's
know
luck
at
or
these
bad
times.
luck. Exactly. So, but I heard a lot of buzz and rumor after that session about that. So yeah, people were like, "Hey, this was probably one of the interesting things that happened at that large event."
Yeah, and it definitely led to a kind of a bit of a like, how do we bring sessions like that into the main conference? Because it was very much out. I'm going to say out there, not within the kind of the typical agile ballpark at the time. So to me, that was one of those great examples of there's really good ideas out there that we might not think of as agile, that we can start playing around with and seeing what we can do with them.
Yeah, and like you say, the really new and wild ideas are typically not yet at the conference itself, because at the moment that the people are selecting, yeah, it looks like we don't understand it fully, and then there is some kind of open space session where people really openly discuss and try to understand and form an idea, and that is indeed where there is a lot of value. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of finding ways of having open space kind of sessions to actually fill in the gaps on somewhere the interesting things are. So thanks for bringing that all up, because it's I think it's part of what not always people realize, how a conference can make a difference, or how sessions at the conference can make a difference.
Yeah,
At
and
least
it's
to
almost like,
start.
yeah, and it's those kind of the hallway conversations you have in the conferences as well. Sometimes I always used to find the best conversations and the best sessions were not the official sessions. They were the chats you had either in the bar in the evening, or when you kind of came out of a session and your brain was just kind of slowly kind of trying to figure things out, and you just almost like that debrief, and from that you kind of go, oh, okay, I get it. So we could do this, and what about X, Y, and Z, and then you start pulling in new ideas, and I kind of think of it as a catalyst. You kind of throw all these ideas into the mix and see what new comes out of it.
Yeah, and like you say, in the bar, then you meet someone who was in another session, and you both
Right.
exchange a little bit, and based on that, you create a new idea that's actually not from the one session or the other, but it's kind of a mix, and probably the experience of both of or all the people in that kind of conversation. If it's then an open space or a bar or a hallway conversation, it's yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. And those early agile conferences, there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I agree. And these days it's sometimes a little bit harder, because yeah, there's a lot of solutions that are people trying to sell, but it's more, yeah, sometimes it's more like, how do we find problems and things on how we can create things together.
Yeah, I think Chris Matz makes a differentiation between community needs, and I think he might call it community solutions. And I'm kind of definitely more on the need side of things, rather than just I don't know. So I go to a lot of conferences that just feel like echo chambers. Or I guess I don't go to them anymore, but it's just the same people saying the same thing again. And there's a need for that, because there's always new people that need to learn these new ideas. But I miss the conferences where it's more creative and no more curiosity of new ways, new ideas, different ideas.
I fully agree. I'm like, where do I still go? And well, for me, one of the reasons why I'm doing this sessions, these recordings, is to get in touch with a lot of friends that I used to see at conferences, and sometimes at yeah, finding out new people, or finding or reconnecting with certain people, because it's these kind of conversations where sometimes we learn something from it, and the conferences. Well, yeah, I don't always get the fresh ideas. I get new people that might repeat something that has been said already before, and sometimes it's interesting because it's a different angle to it. But in many cases, for me, after X number of years, it's a little bit like you say. What do I still get out of that in a way?
Yeah. It's, to me, it's particularly now we're moving back to in-person conferences. It's the people. When COVID and all the conferences were online, they weren't the same because it was just sessions. And while there was an attempt to try and create a bit of a social kind of environment where you could meet people, I never really got anything out of it that way. But going to in-person conferences, and the meeting old people and renewing friendships, but also meeting new people and kind of picking up the new ideas from them.
Exactly. Okay, let's. That's already a very nice start of the whole conversation. Let's jump into that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
So I didn't intend going into IT. I was always looking to go into music. So I didn't do kind of any computer sciences in A level. I did maths, physics, and music, and then my degree at university was a music degree, and it was a science degree in music. So it was sound recording, studio engineering, and Midi programming and all those sort of things.
Wow.
And I was a classically trained musician, so I had a piano diploma, grade 8 on the cello. Yeah, I was never. Don't think I was ever good enough to be a professional musician as a performer. But I used to love the orchestral side of things. Just going out and again, to me, it was the social side of it. You're going out and you're meeting people, and you get to rehearse, but you also get to tour, and there's the buzz and the adrenaline of concerts. But after rehearsals, we'd go out and have a few drinks and chat, and that was my kind of social group. What I found at university, again, I was wanted to, my initial plan was to be a sound engineer, studio kind of recording, and that sort of things. I sort of realized my hearing was shot and was nowhere near good enough to compete with my peers. But one part of the degree was programming, getting back into programming MIDI software, and I kind of realized that actually I was that's where my strength was. So
and when you
I
talk
finished,
about MIDI programming, how is that in a language, or is that more?
MIDI is a musical digital interface. I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's a way of kind of sending. The computer tells the synthesizer what notes to play and which patches to use, which sounds to use, and what volume to use. So it's basically a way of remotely programming a keyboard or a synthesizer, and then you can do things with samples. So I used to. I think my project at university was kind of remote, doing that sort of remote programming, where I could take some input and do something with that input and send it to a synthesizer, and then the synthesizer would then kind of would play it. So yeah, and the what most of the people on the course were doing was in, I don't know if you remember, Apple HyperCard, a very kind of simple, kind of quite a visual language. I kind of outgrew that kind of quite quickly, and I was kind of into, basically I taught myself C.
Wow. Okay.
I kind of taught myself. So I was programming in C on I think it was probably an Atari ST, because our Atari ST had a special MIDI port. So MIDI was a kind of serial interface as well. So you plugged a MIDI cable from your computer into the synthesizer to send the messages back and forth. So the Atari ST had a MIDI port built into it.
And was rather popular in the
It was
80s, 90s,
kind of,
something like that.
it was kind of it was kind of got a bit of a niche specialism in that music industry, and there was some kind of quite expensive software just that would just effectively turn your Atari into a little studio. One that was kind of a slightly kind of tangential career path back into IT, because I suddenly realized actually that's where my strength was, and I went and did a MSc conversion course. So probably did just a 1 year proper IT course, that then kind of taught me programming properly, got me to a kind of a point where I could get a job as a programmer. But just looking back on the musical side of things, I just think that was such a massive influence in my ability to collaborate, and almost kind of the roots of agile. I think that rehearsal of something with a deadline of a a concert. And when the concert comes, you just need to be able to perform a piece as well as possible. I think there's lots of links back to agile, and I think there's lots of people out there in the agile community that I know that have similar backgrounds actually that would say the same thing.
Yeah, on the number of, I didn't keep track on the number of people that I've interviewed who played music one way or another, but I think it's enormous. I've tried to look at some diversity, and I probably should keep track of the number of people who played an instrument, because it's some way in a way involved in music. And I wanted to add something as well. You say programming, and you programmed your Atari. I think that's also something where you get immediately feedback, because if you program it, you run it, you immediately hear like, hey, this sounds what I had in mind, or totally doesn't sound like it, which is something that we're really good at or using a lot in the agile community as well, getting quick feedback. I think that's also a way that you got into programming with immediate feedback. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think so. I think I guess instinctively, and I guess when you're kind of working on a personal project yourself, you're doing this anyway. But that write a bit of code, run it, does it do what you want it to do? That satisfaction of seeing the results you want to get out of it, and that kind of quick feedback cycle were definitely things that gave you a sense of achievement. That's that quick feedback cycle.
Yeah, and yeah, that's what I thought, and I can It depends a little bit, depending on if I look how my father worked into IT with mainframe programming, or with what is it called? These other, it's not index cards, but somehow these cards that you have to
punch cards.
Punch cards, exactly. Well, it took a few days before it was run, so it could take a week before he got any feedback. That's a completely different way of running into computers than with you trying something and immediately hearing yourself if you like it or not, or if other people might like it. But yeah, it's again, it's the whole shebang. I would say that is very logical on how you run into agile with all the different kind of things, like you say, the collaboration, the feedback.
I think the kind of thinking about it is that sense of even though we weren't running. We certainly had. I wasn't doing any automated testing. It was very manual. But there was a lot of, as I remember it, what I'd call probing. Now, just try something, see what happens, learn from it, try something else until you get the result that you want. So there was very interactive as well. So even more than just the feedback cycle, it was always kind of inherently the way it worked.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And yeah, I wouldn't know if you could do automatic testing in that kind of software. That might be a different kind of thing.
You probably, I think some of it you probably could. I think just for the artistic bit, maybe not, because it's so creative.
Yeah, that's I think it was David Hussman who said something like, I can show you a sheet of music, but based on that, can you tell if it's great music or not? Most people would not be able to do that. Where if you would hear the music, you would already say, hey, it brings me joy or not. But most people would not be able to do that if they saw just a sheet of music. Some people might immediately understand that, but I would say assumes already a certain level of musicality, or some kind of techniques on this kind of things.
Which probably has kind of ties back into visual management and being able to see the work rather than in music you're hearing the work, but one of the things we do with Kanban boards and visual management is trying to be able to see the work so we can manage it better. There's probably some overlaps there as well.
Yeah, well, when you say that, we say in Kanban, we say, okay, we want to limit the number of things and that's happening. If you add too much music instruments all at the same time, that's probably not something what most people would like to hear, or depending on how it's mixed again. But if it's all has the same kind of priority, the same height, then probably rather hard to listen to.
There's definitely, I think a lot of the top producers will say it's as much about what you take out as what you put in.
Exactly. That's
kind of creating the space.
Okay, I want to move to that next question. If you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you?
I mean, I guess as I said, the original plan was music, and maybe I could have been some form of musician or had a career there, but I I don't think I really ever would. The one thing maybe um, that I wish I might have picked up earlier, that I kind of enjoy now is running. So I kind of only got into running about 10 years ago, just out of necessity, really, for health reasons, and kind of discovered that actually I quite enjoy it. And while I'm nowhere near any sort of professional athlete, I'm not bad. I'm not slow. Well, I probably am at the moment because I've kind of had a bit of an injury, but I actually kind of did all right at running and kind of ran marathons at a kind of reasonable time. Um, I always kind of wonder what might have happened if I'd realised that actually I I had a bit of a talent for running a lot earlier. Um, I, I probably not at all related to agile, but well, other than I do kind of think there's metaphors again in terms of preparing for races and training and kind of knowing your capability and estimating your finish times and things like that.
And could you say some more, because you talked already a bit about out of necessity, but how did you, because running the need out of necessity for health is one thing, but then also deciding, okay, let's go for running a marathon, which is already a rather long distance for a long time running. Is how did that inspire you? Was that you gradually were more and more addicted to it, or how should I see that?
Yeah. It's small steps and kind of slowly improvements and constantly trying to push myself. So, um, the first bit of running, I mean, basically, I got told I needed to lose weight. I was clinically obese. Um, so the first thing was, it wasn't just running; it was dieting, but just getting on the treadmill, getting to the point where I was bored of the treadmill and kind of going, okay, well, I'll go start running on the road. Um, Actually, a big part of it was discovering parkrun. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with parkrun, but it's a community where down at my local park, and hundreds, if not thousands, of kind of places around the world. 9 o'clock ish, but in the UK it's 9 o'clock Saturday morning. Is a free 5K. You just turn up. You register, you have a barcode, it's timed, you get your time at the end of it. So one, that getting into that community, where I'm kind of now running with other people, that discipline, and almost kind of a cadence of, it was a weekly thing. That's what I do on Saturday morning now, and unless there's something else on, it gets me out of bed on a Saturday morning and I go for a run. And nowadays it's, I'm not running so quickly, but it's not about the time anymore. But back then, Saturday morning was my time to really push myself, try and run faster, get a personal best. And then once you kind of get to that point with okay, well, actually I can do 5K now. There's a 10K race coming up. So we have the Brighton Marathon. Part of the Brighton Marathon weekend was the Brighton 10K. So it's like, well, okay, let's see if I can do a 10K. So you go and do the 10K, do a few 10Ks. Partly then getting sucked into that marathon experience is like, oh, I remember doing that first 10K and kind of, I think, walking with my bag with all my stuff in it that looked like I was running a marathon, but I knew I was only running the 10K. So I felt a bit like a fraud. And kind of thinking, you know what, next year I should just do the marathon. And so there's kind of setting that as an aspiration and a target, and then figuring out, well, okay, how do I get there? I need a training plan. I should probably run half marathon before I do a marathon, or run a 10 mile, then a half marathon. So kind of, coming up with a bit of a roadmap to how I'm going to go from 10K one year to a marathon next year.
Because before you did then that 10K, you didn't have any plan, or you just showed up every Saturday and there was no plan or anything. Is that how I hear it? And then
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'd go out during the week, but yeah, there was no there's no plan. I mean, by the time I went to the first park run, I knew I could run 5K because I was doing it on a treadmill, and the treadmill. So with the treadmill, I was, working up the distance and working up the levels and working up the programs, kind of from the easy ones to the harder ones, until I got to the point where I could do the hard ones and I couldn't make the treadmill go any faster.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay.
and it was, other than just grinding on the treadmill for an hour or so, and that's just I hate the treadmill, beyond half an hour,
Because
just because
because you only see the same thing.
there's no variety. There's no, you are just running the pace the treadmill tells you to run. It's a different sort of running than going out on the road where, or just, I live, kind of on the north side of Brighton, so I've got the South Downs and the kind of, countryside, less than a mile away from me. So just being able to get out, or just get out into a park where there's, a bit more greeneries, but it's much more interesting than, and
And is
and
that
you can,
then easy for you? Because like I want to jump into a little bit that you said this is a treadmill that set the space. Okay, you set the space on the treadmill, but then you follow. Is it easy, or was it easy for you with the first time that you start running without the treadmill to set the pace yourself? Because that's it. Well, for me, it's something I find really hard. I
um,
totally have no control over my body, and so I really don't feel it when I run too fast or too slow. And so I wonder if that was an adjustment for you, or
I mean, I don't remember it being. I mean, I guess the first times I went out, I was just running. Now, I guess the thing with parkrun is then you get a 5K time, and then I remember doing the first one and thinking, oh, okay, I think I can run quicker than that. And I guess I do have a natural sense of pace and what I can do, but also, obviously when you're running 5K, there's an element you're just kind of going out as kind of quickly. You still don't want to go out too quickly. So there's a lot of science behind it as well. And I guess that's one of the other things that interests me. And maybe in another parallel universe, I'd have kind of got more into the science side of things. But the way your VO2 max and your lactate thresholds, and the way your body reacts to these things, you go out too quickly, you're going to burn out. So
and is that
there's a bit
something
of
that you
pacing.
knew at the start, or is that something you now know after so many
No,
years?
that's something I learned because I got interested in it.
Mhm.
How does this running? I mean, I started reading, subscribing to running magazines and looking at websites, and and once you start getting into training plans, so particularly when you're into half marathon, maybe even 10K, where the specific different types of training. Interval training is very different from a threshold training, which is very different from what they call a kind of long weekend run, just a long distance leisurely run. Each of those things are training your body in different ways. So looking at training plan, looking at these different sorts of runs, and kind of are starting to understand how they fitted together, and what the why each of them was there, what the intent behind each of them was. I could just kind of pick that up over time just because I was interested in it. Not you don't have to. I
I
guess that's
know,
just
but
when
I really love because it's the way this conversation is going is really, it shows how driven you were in that whole thing. And a little bit like you said, I was first in music, then I moved to programming, and then to agile, and I see a lot of similarities of how you jump all in, I would say, learn a lot, and try to get information from different sources, but
Mhm.
you jump in trying something, and then seeing, okay, this is more or less something that works. Now I need to learn from other sources, and you learn from other people. Is that a correct assumption that I'm
Yeah, no,
making?
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. It is being interested, being curious, wanting to learn, wanting to um, dig deeper into. I kind of I'm always interested in the theory behind why stuff works and why we do stuff. So, and I guess that goes back to the music and music theory, and the running, and the science of running, and the way the body works, and different running styles, through to agile. Why does agile work? Complexity theory, and a lot of the, kind of getting into a little bit of neuroscience as well, just and human nature, psychology. Always kind of just looking to, and I think that's why I've kind of kept progressing from XP through to Scrum, through to Kanban, through to Lean, into complexity and all those sorts of things. Just because there's always new something out there.
Yeah, it's in that sense it's a rabbit hole because you keep discovering other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, yeah. I think I remember back in the early days, chatting with Mike Feathers, and it must have been one of the very first Scrum gatherings in Boulder. And back then, I remember Mike kind of going, what's next for Agile? What's the next type of? And I just remember thinking, I have no idea. Surely Agile is it? Surely, you can't get better than Agile, can you? And I've learned, it was actually quite a powerful question. And and now, if you ask me the same question now, I'd still probably say I don't know. But there's definitely things out there that we still have to learn, that we can bring into what we do with Lean and Agile.
And what you've learned since that conversation with Mike is enormous since.
Exactly. Like that was before Kanban, and Kanban blew my mind when it was like, you don't need iterations, you don't have to do the time box, you can just limit work in progress. It's like, wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely see a lot of that. So, okay, really wonderful how we tie all of that together. Let's move to that next question. What do you consider at this moment your biggest challenge, and why is that a good thing for
you? So I've kind of recently finished a job, and I'm kind of trying to figure out what's next for me. So in some ways, that's my biggest challenge is what do I do next? And I mean, I know in the short term, I've got a contract lined up. I'm just going to work for 3 to 6 months just to buy myself some time. But yeah, I guess I'm thinking, what do I want to do next? What do I want to dig into next, or spend my time on? So do I kind of dig deeper into what I'm interested in with strategy and strategy deployment, and maybe trying to build something around that? Do I get involved in partnerships with other people? So yeah, that's kind of what I'm wondering at the moment is really just from my own career perspective, what's next, because there's opportunities out there, and it's kind of a space where I can make some decisions.
Mm-hmm. And that second part of the question, why is that a good thing for you? What's
I mean, it's the challenge again. I've always been kind of fairly comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. So, and I actually think that uncomfortableness and ambiguity is the good thing. It's like, oh, okay, I don't know what's going to happen next. I have to figure that out. And that's gonna force me or drive me in certain directions, and hopefully something interesting will come out of it. The fact that I don't know what that's going to be doesn't worry me. I think as long as I'm learning new stuff, then I'm generally happy.
Well, and I think what you just described of the past decades, I would say, shows that you keep learning, and that it's a little bit that you do that in all kind of directions, like you brought up with the music, then the programming, then agile, and then actually also the running, which are in many ways different, and at the same time same kind of challenges or same kind of curiosity that brings you on, where can I learn some more? So that's
yeah,
very nice things. And indeed, it's like you say, the especially if we work for a while in a certain area, at some point, like you say, you end up with stopping a certain working for a certain company that brings in again both challenges and opportunities. Like, okay, how the world has changed? What are the next things that you can focus on?
I remember when I worked for Rally Software, one of their values was create your own reality, and that's always stuck with me. So I've just kind of moved on from something else, and that's just the way it is. I need to figure out what's next and create my own reality. But you just kind of mentioned, the world has moved on. I guess that's part of the challenge is I'm finding at the moment that, so I think the market for agile consultants is kind of tough at the moment, and I think partly there's lots of conversation and on social media and whatnot about the state of agile. Is agile dead? What's next for agile? Those conversations just seem to be all over the place at the moment, and I guess my own perspective at the moment is, agile's not dead. The need for agile is greater than ever. How we position it and how we use it to kind of meet organizations' needs might be changing. So I think there's a perspective of agile that has changed, even though agile itself maybe hasn't. So therefore, we as consultants and coaches in the agile community need to figure out, okay, how do we respond and how do we react to that? Because just kind of going, oh, you don't understand agile, you still need it, isn't going to cut it, I don't think.
I really like that. And also I would say, well, even if things might not have changed, there might be new kind of types of clients that are needing our help, that are looking at it in a different way. We're no longer working for the people who just started out. No, because in the beginning, a lot of companies were trying to figure out a lot of that themselves. And now we're, in a way, with companies who, or running behind is maybe too negative, but are really not the front runners of all of this. So these are typically people or companies that look at it in a different way, I would say. So
Yeah. There's the whole scaling aspect of it as well, I guess, which is interesting at the moment. And potentially those laggards, I guess, sometimes tend to be the larger organizations that are slow to catch up and pick up on these things, and they're probably the organizations that are not really interested in agile per se, but they're recognizing that they need to be more responsive in their market, and need to be able to deal with the additional complexities. So that's their need. We can bring in agile methods to do that, but they don't need to know that that's what we call it. As long as they kind of they can deliver faster, they can compete with their competitors in their market and their landscape.
Yeah, I really like that, because indeed sometimes the words don't always matter, but it's, could we still help them, whatever that is then called. I definitely recognize that in some companies, the so-called agile teams were, for me, the lesser agile teams, and the teams that said we have nothing to do with agile actually understood agile much at a better level, but we dropped the names in a way, and not using it. So I definitely recognize a lot of that there. Okay, and I want to jump into that next question, and it feels a little bit like we're going back to what you said before, about what drives you. I feel a lot of drive. I see a lot of passion in this conversation. I also see that when I see interactions with you online, I see a lot of passion when you do presentations and things like that. Do you know where that drive, where that passion is coming from?
I mean, I think it just comes from my own curiosity, and I want to learn. Some of it also. So when I first got into agile, back in the turn of the millennium, I got a lot of help from the leading players in London at the time that were doing XP, and I'm kind of thinking Connextra, the London Extreme Tuesday Club. I'd go out and I'd pick their brains, and kind of get ideas from them and take them back, and we'd try them out, and I'd learn something and go back again and talk about it a little bit more. So part of what drives me is giving that back. I'm now the one with too many years to count, 20, 25 years of agile experience now. One of the reasons I go to conferences is just to give back to the community, because I got such amount from the community in the first place. But it's also a way for me to try and refine my thinking. So if I can talk about an idea in front of however many people for half an hour to an hour, it probably means I've got it reasonably straight in my head. And similarly, then, the blogging that I do is just a way of me trying to get things straight in my head, and piece all these different things together into some larger coherent narrative. So that's, I think, is just all trying to move things forward, trying to figure out a little bit about what's next and what's next for me, and what do I think is interesting or useful or needed in the agile space. So it's kind of going back to that what we were talking about earlier around what do companies need and what is next. My big interest at the moment is around strategy and strategy deployment, and pulling a lot of those ideas from the lean community and figuring out how do we apply those with organizations that are going through agile transformations, because I think there's a gap there and a need there. So how do I articulate that? How do I create something practical and tangible and useful, pragmatic out of it, that people can take away, and how ultimately, how can I help other people in their transformations?
Yeah, and what I heard also about sharing to learn is that what I'm hearing is also that feedback is really important for you to learn. And is that a correct assumption there? That is, when
Yeah.
you share, you want to have feedback about your presentations or blogging or whatever?
Yes. Yeah. And there's probably two types of feedback there. One, there's a kind of an implicit feedback of, when I've done a conference talk, I generally have a good sense of how it went, and did I feel it came over well. But then there's slightly more explicit feedback from audience members, and the kind of the official feedback you get from conferences. The challenge is not treating that feedback as vanity metrics, and hey, everyone loved my talk. I don't find that interesting. I'm more interested in just actually the conversations that I have, the questions people come up with, because usually those are that's the really interesting feedback, where people ask a question where they've not understood something that I thought I'd explained, that makes me kind of go, okay, I need to find a better way of explaining that. Or they ask a question which is something that I didn't cover. They kind of go, okay, I need to add that in next time. So yeah, I typically it's people looking for examples and stories, and experiences.
Yeah, I think for many of that.
Yeah, I kind of, one of the things I miss, I stopped using Twitter, for probably obvious reasons. I miss the days of the good old days of Twitter, when people would be tweeting during conferences, and specifically during my conference talks, because you could go back and look at the Twitter feed and see which things resonated with people, because they're the things that we were tweeting, or see the back channel conversation that was going on, to kind of help you kind of go, okay, well, what are people taking from this? There's just because Twitter's, you just don't get that at conferences anymore, because there's so many people who stopped using Twitter, which is a shame.
Yeah, I have the same feeling. It's like all the other tools that I'm trying out, I don't get anything out of that, or it doesn't feel like the same vibe. But the vibe on Twitter is gone as well. It's like, yeah, it's like you say, especially for me, I have a really bad handwriting. So for me, Twitter was also a way to write notes. Like, okay, now I can write something and I can look back after a conference, say, hey, that talk, okay, there is so much I get out of that, and find a way to then, and if I would try after that, lately I tried sometimes, okay, can I write something up in a Google Doc or whatever, but it doesn't, somehow it's different if you tweet something in, and then you have the interaction and everything. Yeah, for me, I miss that as well. I recognize that.
Yeah, for me, it was that public sharing, and the the collaboration between Well, both between people that were at the conference, because there was this little back channel going on. Some of the best conferences, there would be a back channel going on of I just remember literally sitting next to like someone like Toby, and we'd both be tweeting about the same session, that we're both sitting next to each other. But it was that engagement with a kind of a wider audience, but also potentially you're engaging with people that can't make it to the conference and sharing those ideas. So I do remember there was a bit of a debate of like, is doing that respectful to the speaker or not? Should you be concentrating on the speaker rather than tweeting? And my take on it was, it's yes, I'm being respectful to the speaker because I'm sharing their ideas even to an even wider audience than the people in the room.
Yeah, I have that same feeling. It's I don't think it's unrespectful. It's like you say, it's bringing that audience, giving feedback, having conversations, and things like that. It allows me also to ask more questions about the conference I haven't seen, or if other people are jumping in. For me, it doesn't sound like unrespectful, but it might feel different for other people depending if you're using a laptop or a phone or whatever. But things have moved. Well, things were different. Again, now we have that a lot less these days, I would say.
Yes.
Okay, I want to move to that next question about what do you consider your biggest achievement? And before I want to jump in, I want to ask also for you, because I've seen that as a kind of theme in these sessions when I ask questions. Is it because this is basically your moment to brag and to kind of proudly say what is good? Is that easy for you, Karl, to brag about something?
I'm not a natural bragger. I don't think I'm not good at self-marketing. On the other hand, I think I do have some stories to tell where there's things I've definitely been proud of that I'm quite happy to talk about. So so the main one that springs to mind, and this goes back to when I was at the BBC and we were first introducing XP, was just just what we achieved there by using the agile practices at the time. So we were kind of set a bit of context. We were working on interactive TV, digital TV, interactive TV software. So this was 1999, 2000. In the UK, Sky Digital hadn't launched. The free to air, what was back then on digital, hadn't launched. So this was like really cutting edge, bleeding edge technology, where the software was going to run in a set-top box, but it was a very, to make these set-top boxes affordable back then, 25 years ago, they were kind of very low spec, low memory, with very bespoke technology in them, software in them. So on digital, which was the free-to-air digital platform, had a language called MHEG, which was kind of a really very, it's very, and on the one hand it was very powerful, on the other hand it was very basic. It was just a markup language. Sky was a platform called OpenTV, which was developed in C, but it was still kind of quite limited in what you were doing. And to develop this software, it got broadcast over the air in a data stream alongside the video and audio, downloaded into the set-top box and run. And you had multiple versions of the set-top boxes, which were all had their own peculiarities. So the complexity was really bleeding edge, and the complexities of writing software which would run in the box and do what you wanted to do, we were really, we were making it up as we go along. So I actually look back and think, if we'd tried to plan that and develop that in a non-agile way, traditional way, I don't think we'd have delivered anything, because we were just, it was just try something, see what we can make work. So that idea of
and that was, but it's also hardware was involved in this, right?
Yeah. So yes, this was. I mean, we weren't. The hardware was there, but yeah, this was software that was basically being downloaded into the hardware, and then you controlled it with a remote control. Um, so testing it was very manual as well. But taking that spirit of, so I guess that we kind of really boiled it down to the kind of the principles of agile, because we couldn't do. You can probably do it now. By the time I left there 5 years later, we were just getting our head around how we might run automated tests inside the set-top box and get results back. Because we had to build our own testing framework, and that testing framework took up memory that we probably couldn't afford. So some of those things. So how do you build it in a way that you can test it? We set up automated remote control rigs where we could just control multiple set-top boxes at the same time with a single remote control. But I think the more interesting bit was that kind of breaking down work into incremental, small. I mean, we were doing it with index cards. What can we? And we basically were running weekly iterations. What do we think we can build this week? And then looking at the portfolio of projects. Again, we had multiple projects that we were working on across these multiple platforms for multiple customers across the BBC. So, sport wanted their applications for Wimbledon and the football championships, and then you had natural history wanting stuff for walking with dinosaurs. You had one of the other things we did, Antiques Roadshow, doing a kind of a live quiz on top of it, all sorts of different things. Essentially, we were just constant little short-term roadmap of what do we think we can do in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and what can we do in the next week. And at the end of the week, we kind of go, well, okay, what do we actually do? With the view to, we know that there's a program going out with a fixed date. So we literally had, I mean, okay, they weren't literal deadlines, but they were immovable dates, because the BBC weren't going to move the broadcast date of a program because we didn't have our software ready. If it wasn't ready, we missed it. It didn't happen. And even more, Wimbledon tennis weren't going to shift the whole tennis tournament because our software wasn't ready. So we had these, really hard fixed dates. Getting the software something up and running such that when we hit the date, we could broadcast things. And I guess what's proud, one, just the amount of stuff we got done with the bleeding edge technology, but we won awards as well. So we won BAFTAs because what we were actually doing was so probably not so much the quality of it, but the innovation behind it. And it worked. It did the job. So yeah, I guess that's one of the things I'm really, really proud of.
And can I ask a little bit, because
Yeah.
this is BBC, this is media. I've worked also in a couple of media companies, and one of the things I've noticed there is that many media understand the idea of quickly releasing something. Like the BBC has a journal every day. They have to go live with the news, whatever, and so they have to adjust. If a very important person dies like 5 minutes before the news, it has to be on the news, and so they're used to adopting and at the same time delivering every day, because I assume that they had a news every day for the last couple of decades, I would say. Did that help you for releasing software, because a part of the business understands that part, or didn't help that for you?
I'm not sure. I'm not convinced, because it was, we were developing a package of software to be broadcast with a program on a particular date. I guess maybe there was a little bit of understanding that, because we didn't know the broadcast date, we had to have this extra flexibility. And maybe it was just, the culture of the BBC that people were more accepting of it. But I guess one of the other things we did, though, was to try and figure out how do we split out the content from the application so that we could vary the content more dynamically from the application itself. And we built, and in fact, one of my favorite stories from that time was, which I talk about as the only time we have deliberately compromised on quality in order to meet a deadline, and it was the right decision to do. So 2004 Olympics, we were building an application for the 2004 Olympics because it was the Olympics, and digital TV.
They wouldn't change
at
the date of the Olympics
exactly.
either.
So exactly, they're not going to change the date of the Olympics. And what was interesting about that year was 2004. We had the Olympics. We had Wimbledon, because Wimbledon is every year. We also used to do the Open Golf. So again, that's every year, and these are all fixed dates. And it was also the Euros, European Football Championships, in 2004 as well. So we had these 4 big sporting events. And that was one where, there was a lot of pressure to do everything. And we struggled to do that. So one of the things we did for the Olympics, we said, well, the Olympics is only 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It's a finite period of time, and then it doesn't happen again for the next 4 years. So we're pretty sure that we can cobble something together that's low quality, like beneath the surface, the back end. So if things break, we can keep the service running, fix it in the background, and get it up and running again. So one of the things was the medals table. So having a live medals table. I think the really tricky bit was a live, effectively building our own live EPG within the application, where that was the first time that had been done. The data feed was coming from externally. We had no idea about the quality of the data feed. So every now and again, the data feed would just break the application. We knew that was like.
For clarity, EPG, that stands for Electronic Programming Guide.
Electronic Program Guide. So basically, what sports are on what video channels within the application at what times. Right. And some of those, and bearing in mind, this is a kind of very basic set-top box technology. So the graphics weren't, really high definition. So there's, and the physical space for rich graphics was, we didn't have that. So every now and again, you'd get a program which was like a 2-minute long program, which you couldn't display, and that would break the system. So we tried to anticipate that as much as possible. But what we actually did was build it so that when the EPG, the Electronic Program Guide, broke, we could just pull it out of the application and keep the rest of the application running, figure out how to fix it and get it working again, and then plug it back in again. So the bits of that that we knew were kind of held together by tape and string, but we only had to keep it up and running for a few weeks, and then it was probably going to get mothballed. And then we were confident by the time the next big sport event that needed that came round again, we were probably going to end up rewriting it again, because the technology would advanced and things would have moved on. So yeah, that's kind of one of those kind of peculiar examples where we said, actually, we're going to build something that's lower quality than we would like, because we can get away with it and it helps us meet the date.
Because in a way, it's a kind of one-way event. Even if it's happening every 4 years, you know that by the next time you will need it. Technology has moved so much that there is no, it doesn't make any sense to keep it perfectly. Yeah. Especially, I would assume, I don't know, these set-top boxes, are these recycled, or do people get new ones like every 5 years or something like that? Or is
no, the set-top boxes, exactly, update, and obviously the technology was advancing, so they were getting faster processors and more memory, and the bandwidth for the actual broadcast technology was improving as well. So we were kind of knew that by the time this thing was going to be needed again, it was basically going to be obsolete. So I just thought it was for me, it was a really fascinating example of making a trade-off that you wouldn't normally make. And Agile gave us the ability to make that trade-off. Yeah,
because you knew the context, and I think that this is one. It's a very nice example of the context is in a way throwaway, because, like you say, although you will need it again in 4 years, that everything has changed by that time, that making it perfectly would not make any sense. It would be a waste of time for everything. So that's a really nice example of where, actually, for me, it's like focusing on the context, and what is the quality that is needed in
Yeah.
that in these circumstances.
Yeah.
And that's really nice example. And like you say, on the cutting edge of everything, because I at that moment, like electronic programming guides were like on set-top boxes. Again, with the Olympics, where I assume that also the timetables or what sports would be sent out at some point. Originally, that
Yeah.
program seems to be fixed, but it changes all the time, right?
Yeah. No, it was changing all the time. So we were constantly getting updated feeds, and those updates would invariably break it in some way, in some way we hadn't anticipated.
And that, if the way I understand it, that feed also doesn't come from the BBC, but comes from originally from the Olympics Committee or whatever the organization behind, or other kind of sources. Or
I think it came from somewhere else in the BBC, but they were building this feed for the first time themselves. It wasn't so we were taking a feed which was in itself, an innovative and cutting edge thing. Brand new, effectively a brand new product itself.
It's a really nice example of cutting edge, where you focus on on the different things that you need at some
Yeah,
time. So
and
very nice.
in hindsight, we were effectively we were building for resilience, really, rather than trying to break something which didn't break. We recognized that it was highly likely to break, and we built it in such a way that we could recover it really, really quickly. I wish I'd known some of that language back then. And the other side, you just reminded me of something else. I could think back to then, and I kind of think we were kind of doing DevOps before DevOps was a thing, because we had the operations team that were basically would install and play out the application. We worked really closely with them to kind of make sure that we were delivering the packages, the code to them in a way that they could take it, and so we could do really quick upgrades as we were doing fixes, because there was a kind of a standard format, and they knew what to expect, and we kind of built little utilities so they could start and stop processes and see what was running and get the status of everything, because we would all this back then, we had just building our own lots of little Perl processes that were doing all the data processing. So I think back then, and I guess what I'm obviously I'm proud of the BAFTAs and the awards, but I just think what we were doing was just really cool and almost ahead of its time.
I really like, and just for you talked about 2004, DevOps was officially invented in 2009, so 5 years ahead. Okay, you're probably not the only company thinking in that kind of direction.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it just didn't have a name back then, I don't think.
Exactly. That's a little bit where I wanted to go. It's and I really like that you say we didn't want to create something perfect, but we wanted to make sure that when it broke, then it was easy to repair, and that is bringing much more resilience. And I still see companies sometimes thinking like, yeah, but we have to make that service that it always works well. We've seen how that works in real life. Like in reality, things do break, and it's much better that we can build services that are don't suffer that much when things are breaking. So
Exactly.
really nice example of agile mindset in many different kind of ways. So nice achievement. So thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
That's, let's move to that next question. Do you have a personal agility tip to share?
I kind of I struggle to kind of know what to say for this one, but I guess my tip, and I guess what I encourage people is go back to that idea of curiosity. It's just always have some idea about why you're doing something. What's the theory behind it? Why is it a rational, coherent thing to do? And how are you going to know whether it's the right thing to do? So kind of treating everything we do as a hypothesis that we're testing, or something that we're doing to kind of probe and kind of interact with the system just to get some feedback, rather than implementing a practice just because we think it's best practice. So that's the way I pretty much try and approach everything. Is it's all a hypothesis. I'm always open to learning and being wrong. and kind of being proved wrong. So, and I quite often go into conversations with, like, just that mindset of, let's assume I am wrong. How would I learn that I'm wrong on something?
I really like that approach. I really like that way of thinking, because that's how we learn most, of course. And it's not because, like, it worked in 2004 at the BBC, that in 2024 it still works, even at the BBC or somewhere else. It's things have moved on, things have been, and maybe there are better solutions. It could still work, but that's, like you say, we need to prove it again, probe it, try it out. I really like that.
And every context is different, so it might be best practice in 99% of context, but you end up in the 1% where it just really doesn't make sense, or it makes sense, but it's not absolutely necessary, and maybe what they're doing already is working equally well. So treating these things as hypotheses and ideas, and testing them.
I really like that. And that is so true at so many levels: at personal level, at team level, at company level, at conference level, at many different kind of things. So thanks for sharing. Let's move to that next question. We talked already briefly about remote working or remote conferences. So did you do a lot of remote working before COVID, for example?
A little bit, but probably not that much. So remote working tended to be the exception, and it tended to be when you were working with offshore and nearshore teams. So I remember when COVID came in, I was running some workshops where there was teams in the UK, in London, and then there were teams in India. The UK teams would get together in a room, and then we'd dial in the teams in India. So there was that kind of hybrid thing. And I think what COVID gave us was almost kind of a shift to leveling the playing field, and kind of going, well, actually, maybe it's more effective if we're all remote. So we don't have to be in the room just because we can be. The other thing, I think the other thing we've learned is just the technology is there, and the technology has advanced quite quickly and sufficiently, though, that we can probably do things now in a better way than we could before. One of the things that amused me was at the start of COVID, where teams were on, were probably on something like WebEx, because WebEx had been around, and WebEx was the platform of choice pre-COVID, from what I remember. And then Zoom kind of came in, or Zoom was up and coming. So you saw organizations shift rapidly to Zoom, and then what seemed like, after not being on Zoom for not that long, a lot of organizations shifting rapidly to something like Teams. So organizations kind of figured out how they could rapidly roll out these changes in technology when they really needed to.
Much faster than they ever thought they would be able to.
Yes, you kind of go, okay, so when you have a team of people that are focused on doing something because there's a real drive and intent and purpose behind it, we can do it. So why don't we do that the rest of the time? That always fascinated me.
I have a similar kind of story that actually happened before I joined it, but there was a story from a Belgian bank, and the bank, I don't know what happened in the UK, but in Belgium, the government at some point decided during the first wave of COVID, like, okay, one of the things that they said is that because people might not have a job, or might be whatever being stoned, your people are, if that have financial troubles, they're not forced to pay back their loans. So basically, you could pause your bank loan that you had, and that is has always been possible, that you could talk to your bank and you could say, I'm not going to pay back my loan, but at that moment you still had to pay interest, right? So that you could. But in Belgium, the government decided for all Belgian banks, they also don't have to pay interest for a couple of months. So for the time being, until we roll back this decision. And so now all banks had like 1 month to implement that feature, because by the end of it was decided the beginning of March, and by the end of March, people would get bills and everything like, hey, you didn't pay your interest. So they had to implement that. And I remember the story at that bank, like they basically just had done their 3 months planning and they had everything done. And then the government says, no, you have to change it. And they were able to do that without all the big hoops that they normally would do. And they implemented in the least possible control way in a bank, which is usually, these kind of things where all the processes are very high and everything. And I remember joining later, and we used that example a lot because, like you say, before you had that big process that we always try to move more in the agile ways. Now you had a very lean process, but probably you skipped a bit too much because you probably want to do a little bit more of security. We didn't have any problems, and I didn't hear of any problems at any other bank, but maybe we want to do a little bit more. So now we're looking, instead of pulling from this side, now we say, okay, can we go back to a little bit more control, or whatever you want to call it, but from a different pool, and use that example like, you did that. And most of all, you did it while everybody was at home, not being able to talk to each other like we're used to. And it worked. And it was such an eye opener for so many people, like, oh, it is actually possible.
Yeah. And then, COVID's over with and people just drift back to the old ways of working,
and so
kind of
is there anything,
all those lessons they've learned?
Well, that's why I wanted to go. Is there anything, a lesson that you've learned that you say, hey, this is something that I didn't know, or that I've learned in that whole period, or that you now learn about remote working?
I think in some ways it reinforced. It's not so much learning. I mean, it's relearning rather than learning, but just good meeting discipline. That because we don't want to fatigue people with just spending all time, on Zoom calls or on online calls, trying to keep them as short as possible, having a really kind of clear, focused purpose and agenda, and having ways that we're going to interact with, making sure we're interacting with people and keeping people engaged, and contributing to the meeting, because that's really easy to do. And I think when because it's so easy, it's easy to get lazy when you're in an in-person meeting. I think because it's people are in front of you and you can see where they're engaged, so you can wing it a little bit more. You can kind of make it up as you go along and kind of react. You can't do that when you're online. So I think that whole kind of idea of meeting discipline, which wasn't new. It was just like, oh yeah, we can't wing this anymore. We've got to be a little bit more intentional about how we run meetings. So that, I think that to me, that was the kind of the big aha. And and then likewise,
Problems become much more visible in a way, or the problems are, you can't avoid them more.
They're either more. You mean in person or online?
Online, I mean online.
Well, so in some ways they're more visible. In some ways they're more invisible. So it's very easy for people to turn their camera off and be on their phone or doing email during the meeting because they're not visible. So and my kind of take on that is if they're doing that, it's probably because they're not engaged in the meeting. We need to redesign the meeting, or you need to you don't just tell people not to do that. You need to kind of think about how your meeting is designed in order to engage them so that they don't want to do that.
Or do they have to be in the meeting? Which is
exactly. Or do they need to be in the meeting? So again, that being a little bit more intentional about or do we even need this meeting in the first place?
That's even a better sentence.
Or what can we do? What can we do before the meeting? So pre-work for the meeting that people can do asynchronously, so that when we come into the meeting, we don't spend that first half of the meeting coming up to speed, because people come in and we can just get straight onto doing the work that we need to do together in the meeting. The other thing I've always been, I guess, very relaxed about with online meetings, that I've kind of realized is the social side of it. So in an in-person meeting, I'll generally, get people in. We want to make the most of the time in the room, so we get started straight away, because we recognise that people can chat before and after the meeting. Whereas in an online meeting, you're kind of quite often you're kind of seeing people that you've not seen since the last time you were online with them. So just allowing that space at the start of the meeting to have a bit of social interaction, and who's been, what do people do for the weekend, and who watched the football last night, or bit of banter, bit of humor, for 5 minutes, and then go into the meeting. To me, that's not a waste of time at the start of the meeting. Actually, that's a valuable time just to kind of get some of those interactions that we're missing while we have the chance.
Yeah, I recognize one of the things I've noticed is that typically when you do a physical meeting, while everybody is not there, you automatically do that. You ask, okay, Carla, how are you? What's the weekend? How's your partner? How are the kids? Whatever we bring up, what we know about the other people. And remote, somehow it felt in the beginning that for a lot of people, it was like, oh, as long as not everybody's there, we keep doing our email or doing other
Right.
stuff. And it's only when everybody's there that we start the meeting, and we're kind of losing that first few minutes while not everybody is there.
Yeah.
And I like what you say. We can use that time as well to socialize and to create that connection.
Yeah.
But it feels to me, I don't know how it's to you, but it feels so much more unnatural. I kind of have to force myself or ask people to do that, because I see that in a physical meeting you automatically do that, or at least, or I'll rephrase. I have learned to do that automatically over doing so many physical meetings, and remote. Yeah, I didn't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's that's the intentionality behind it. You need to be a little bit more intentional, and maybe even design the meeting so it's part of the meeting. Almost
Mm,
taking some tips from training the back of the room, where as soon as people come into the meeting, you're engaging them in the topic of the meeting, even though the meeting's not actually started yet. So, just find somebody so either a general conversation, like you just put a slide up with a question, like, hey, let's just start talking about this. Or if you've got breakout rooms, you can still kind of put people into breakout rooms of kind of 2 or 3 people, just while everybody drifts in, and then you bring them back together. So yeah, you need to think through and design for that, whereas we didn't have to do that sort of almost meeting design before.
I really like that, and it's like you say, it's making things much more intentional, and yeah, using it. And again, well, the facilitator becomes even more important, or the whoever is running the meeting one way or another. And thanks for bringing that. I think it's really valuable lessons learned. I want to move to that next question. Is there a book? What's a book that you have read that you want to talk about?
I'm kind of fairly avid reader, so I took the easy option of just what's the book I've just finished. So I've just finished Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke.
That's the book, if I'm correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
So
removed it already. Yeah.
yeah. So she's a professional poker player, and it's not a book on how to play poker, but it's the idea of poker as a metaphor. When you've got uncertainty, you've kind of got limited information, and you're making decisions in order to
Mhm.
maximize the outcome at the end of it, and tips and tricks that she's learned from poker, and how you apply some of those back into business. And then it is just I guess one of the key insights that jumped out at me was the separation of the decision from the outcome, and examples where we look at the outcome, and if it's a good outcome, we assume that it was a good decision that led to the outcome, and if it was a bad outcome, we assume that it was a bad decision that led to the bad outcome. Whereas actually you can make a great decision, and through no fault of your own and just bad luck, you get a bad outcome. And equally, you can make a terrible decision, and by pure luck, you get a good outcome. So there's all this kind of inherent uncertainty in there, and that's the idea of kind of the reason why I got into it is because of the, you know, gets referenced a lot in terms of probabilistic thinking. So, you know, there are chances of certain things happening and chances of other things happening, and when we're making decisions, what we're doing is taking a bet. Thinking in a bet is like, I bet that if I make this decision, I'm going to get that outcome, and that might be a good bet, but you know, it's never 100%. You know, I always you know, look at the weather forecast, and you know, you hear people kind of going, oh well, the weather forecast only said there was a 5% chance of rain, but it's raining, the weather forecast was wrong. Well, no, the weather forecast wasn't wrong. It said there was a 5% chance of rain. That's 5 in 100 scenarios it will rain. We just happen to experienced one of those 5%. So yeah, I kind of found it interesting, just as, you know, dealing with uncertainty, and to me that kind of ties back into to learning. You know, when we're trying out practices and we're building products, we're effectively making bets. If we decide to build a feature, we think it's going to lead to some business benefit, or if we decide to implement a practice, we think it's because it's probably going to lead to some benefit. How do we help ourselves make good decisions, but also accept when a good decision might lead to a bad outcome, or a bad decision might lead to a good outcome?
I really like that. Yeah, it's not the first time. I'm trying to remember who brought the book as well, because it's not the first time that the book is brought up.
It wouldn't be surprising me if it was. I saw you'd done an interview with Pratik. Might have been him or Colleen even. I know the Monte Carlo forecasting crew are all you know, all over it.
Exactly. That's the kind of people I'm thinking about. I'm not sure. I need to double check. But yeah, okay. But like you say, it's really interesting to think on a different way. And I think poker players are really like, okay, and I think also we talked earlier, or you mentioned Ken Beck in the beginning of your career. I think he's also an avid poker player that wrote some blog posts about what he learned from poker. Like, okay, once you lost the money, you don't have to. Well, it's already lost, and whatever he's thinking on that, these kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. And poker players kind of, you know, bad poker players, inexperienced poker players, maybe you know, you get caught up in the emotion of it. And you know, there's a bit of sunk cost fallacy, or there's a bit of there's hindsight bias, or you just start making bad decisions because you're overly emotional. And
Exactly.
so how do you recognize that? So that, and what other kind of strategies could you use to? So, you know, some of it is just going into a poker game and saying, if I lose this amount of money, I'm stopping, rather than kind of going, what people will get into the emotion of it and kind of going, I've lost all this money, I need to win it back, and they carry on playing.
And lose even
so
more.
recognizing those little signals.
And the opposite, if you win so much money, or decide also up front when to stop at that level. Because,
yes.
It's the same kind of decision, I would think, but then reversed. But thanks. I think it's I think it's really wonderful to think about what we're doing. I think lean startup wise, and okay, seeing everything as a bet, and how do we test it, and how do we can verify what? I really like that idea of thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's another great example of just bringing in some ideas from a completely different domain. So, you know, there are things we can learn from poker players about how we run our businesses. You know, that I guess that's one of those other things that fascinates me. That you know, you can get some really good stories and metaphors and examples that you can use to try and explain things to people.
And in a way, I would say that poker, when you do, I don't play poker. I have a son that likes to play poker at a very low level as a student, because for me, when you play poker, the idea that I have is you get rather quickly feedback. You try something and it doesn't work. With a business, even if you write software, you write a feature, it takes a long time compared to poker before you get some feedback. And in a way, we could learn in that kind of thing. Or am I completely wrong there?
No, I mean, I'm not a poker player either myself, but one of the things she talks about in the book is that, in poker, you're making lots and lots and lots of fast decisions. So she says, you know, as a as a laboratory for learning about decision making, it's perfect because you're making so many decisions so quickly. And you can see the patterns of behavior, and you see your own decisions, and you're seeing everybody else's decisions. And in business, maybe we're not making so many decisions so quickly, but equally, I think the point that what if we can make smaller decisions more quickly and get that faster feedback and more feedback? How much would we be able to learn?
That's even, and in a way, with when we went to 2 weeks iterations, or we went actually with Kanban without iterations, making smaller things, getting quicker things out, testing out, and things like that. It's all about getting quicker feedback on our decisions in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like yeah.
Okay, I want to move to, for me, one of the most interesting questions, especially after a conversation like that. What question do you think I should also ask you, and what's the answer?
So one of the questions that interests me at the moment, and it sounds like a pretty basic question, but it's just, what is agile? There's so much discussion going on at the moment, and agile has evolved so much in the last 20, 25 years. I've actually had a few interesting conversations with people recently where we've kind of go, well, what's agile for you? And I guess that's kind of one of the things I've been reflecting on. So my answer is probably a bit of a cop-out answer, but I don't think there's a single definition. I think I describe agile as being pluralistic. So there are many ways of looking at and thinking about agile. And for me, what's important is recognizing that there are different ways of agile, defining agile. What we want is all those things to be coherent with each other. The way I describe it is, there's tactical agile as tactics, which are the processes and practices that we do. There's a whole set of agile practices and processes that we can implement, and that might be from Scrum to XP down to TDD and automated testing and some of those sorts of things. So that's the kind of the tactical side of it. And then you've got the whole it's not about doing agile, it's about being agile. And yes, I agree with that. So I describe that as agile outcomes. So agile in terms of, are we getting the outcomes we want from agile? And that kind of leads you into some of the metrics and measures and potentially OKRs and some of those sorts of things, and that's all valid. What you want to be able to do is make sure that your agile tactics are helping you achieve the agile outcomes. So you need both. But then there's a third level, which I think of as agility as a strategic choice, which is then more about how do we decide which tactics we're going to try, and how do the outcomes we're achieving tie back into our agility as a strategy. So then it's agility more about to be honest, I don't think it's agile itself is not a strategy, but agile kind of informs some potential strategic choices that we make that help us decide what we're going to do. So they've got those three things in there that I think all need to fit together. And then beyond that, you can then kind of go, well, but then actually agile is not really important, because it's more about, are we getting the results we want to achieve, and is the organization heading in the direction it wants to head in? So I kind of break it down into a number of different things, but I'm kind of always interested in about what other models or frameworks people have about how they think about what agile is.
And that might indeed, what we sometimes see is that we're ending sometimes up in religious wars. That what I'm hearing from you is by looking at it from different sides, I'm kind of hearing it doesn't have to be a war. These things might coexist next to each other, or collaborate.
Yes. So going back to that idea of hypotheses and being open-minded, to me, tactics are just hypotheses. Like, here's something we could do. That's the tactical. How would we know whether it's the right tactic? Well, what outcomes we could look for? And then why would we choose that tactic in the first place? So how does it align that to our strategic goals? So to me, having those three things and being able to describe, having a narrative about how they fit together, is very powerful.
I really like that, but that also means that when you do implement one idea of agile, that you need to really think really quickly or hard about how can I quickly see feedback of this kind of thing. That you're not
Yeah.
into I don't know, a rollout plan for the next 4 years. So this is how we're going to do it, and then see if that worked after 4 years or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talk about in terms of strategy deployment, where agility informs or is related to our strategy, but strategy should be continuous. So the phrase I use is one, we want to be outcome oriented. So it's not about what we're doing; it's about the results we're achieving, and the direction we're heading. We want transformation to be continuous, so constantly running experiments and trying things out and seeing what works and what not work, and what things take us towards our outcomes and what things take us away from the outcomes we want. And then how do we engage people in that process? I listened to a podcast by Jay Bloom. Actually, he might be another person for the what's next when we get onto that question. But talking about people that are have a good understanding of the context that might make propositions around what things we might try. That then starts engaging everyone in the organization. So it's transformations move away from being central, top-down plans, effectively.
I really like that. Because it's, again, we're looking, this brings us back on for me what the Agile Manifesto is like. We want to, I can't come up with the exact phrase, but that first sentence, we want to improve our way of developing software, and we want to can't come up with the exact phrase, but
it's just discovering better ways. But also I think of those what typically are called the 4 value statements. I kind of frame those as 4 strategic statements. So those 4 statements are how we choose what practices we implement, because we want to value individuals' interactions and working software and all those sorts of stuff. They don't tell you what to do, but they help guide. Well, what do we need to do so that we can value individuals' interactions, and what do we need to do so we can focus on delivering working software and responding to change and customer collaboration.
I really like that, because indeed these are guidelines that should help us and help us decide. Because one of the things I keep advising to people is when they're stuck is like, you can ask me or other kind of people, you and whoever, but if you just reread the Agile Manifesto, so much is in there. If you just relook at the 2 pages and think about your problem and what statement that is in there in these four first things, or in the 12 principles that are on the second page, what is helping you for your problem? Let's look at your problem, but from these kind of lenses. And I've seen that for myself, it helped a lot. Do you have similar kind of experiences?
Yeah, I go further sometimes, and I'll kind of say, well, write your own manifesto. So don't just copy those 4 value statements. What's important for you, and then we can explain, frame them explicitly as strategies. So what are the guiding policies for you that are going to help you be more agile? It doesn't have to be those 4. It could be something else. And to me, and that's going back to the discovering better ways. That allows us to update some of the language in context. So usually I talk about flow as a strategy. Flow wasn't explicitly mentioned in the Agile Manifesto because it's probably something that we've
discovered later anyway.
Discovered, and say it's not like we've invented it, but it became kind of more prescient and relevant since the manifesto was written.
I really like that what you said, because about create your own manifesto, it's actually a workshop, and that I'm almost these days always do with a team. Is like, I used to first describe the manifesto, then I said, okay, let's make it in a game, and they can recreate the manifesto, and then gradually it turned into create your own manifesto. I give them like statements of 64 different kind of things, and okay, let's prioritize what do you care about as a team, then make pairs about it, and make like 4 or 5 or whatever statements, and that is so much more valuable than the Agile Manifesto rehashing.
Yeah, there's a strategy kind of exercise format called even overstatements, where you kind of pair up two positive attributes, outcomes, or things you want to achieve, and say, you know, we're going to choose to do A even over B. So it's not we're going to choose good A over bad B. It's we're going to choose good A even over good B. And what I find interesting there is so the manifesto was kind of a little bit of good over bad, although we always trying to make the point that we still need processes and tools. So
Exactly.
like, what would that manifesto look like? It'd be quite simple to say individuals and interactions even over processes and tools. And I think that even word becomes quite powerful because it's reinforcing that the right hand side is still good. But then you kind of go, okay, well, if the manifesto is an even overstatement, then yeah, as you say, let's create our own even overstatements.
Yeah, I agree.
It's explicitly reinforcing strategy as a choice.
I think so many people see it as this is left is so much better than right on the manifesto, and it's like, no, you need some kind. There's no for me, there's no community that created so many processes and tools than the Agile community. So it's in
Exactly.
a way we like it, but it just means that if the processes and tools that we currently have are not working, we create just another one, but we still create one. We still need some kind of thing. And it's just like, if the way that people want to collaborate means that process or these tools are not working, then we'll reinvent something. But it's not like we throw them all the process and all the tools away. No, we still need something. And I think that is sometimes misunderstood by people when they start up with Agile. Like, okay, then it means you don't need it. No, it's that overstatement is so, it's really important that people think harder about that, what it actually means. Thank you very much for bringing that up, because that is something I think is so much value. So that brings so much clarity for I think for a lot of people. Look deeper into that manifesto and try to understand, and then indeed create your own thing. I will definitely make a link to the exercise that you say, the workshop or whatever, and that people can learn something from that kind of thing. I want to move to that question you already talked a little bit about that who do you think I should ask next? And you talked already about Jake Bloom, so we'll definitely invite him as well. Who else did you want to invite?
In fact, we should probably call him Dr. J Bloom now, because he's just finished his PhD in the last few weeks.
Wow.
So he's got a lot to talk about. The other two people I think is worth talking to. One is Mike Burrows. So Mike kind of is inventor.
And this is Mike, I think.
Yeah, that's Mike. So he created his agenda shift, which is an approach to transformation. I mean, kind of the outcome-oriented continuous transformation is the subtitle of the agenda shift book. So we're very aligned there, and it's kind of a nice workshop set of exercises just to really engage people in understanding, what's it like for them when they're working at their best. So rather than imposing transformation onto people, we engage people in the transformation. Mike's great, and I've done a lot with Morgan Mike. And then on a similar, Philippe Gouinet, who
I think that's it.
Yeah, is another collaborator with Mike on agenda shift. But Philippe has also done does a lot of work with strategy, and we have very similar views on strategy and agile. And Philippe uses so one of the kind of tools techniques I use with strategy is called the X matrix. And Philippe kind of is a user of that as well. So we'll probably have some interesting things to say. Between Philippe and Mike, all three of us are probably fairly like-minded.
But still, like-minded doesn't mean that the exact conversation. It's probably.
I'm sure. No. Yeah. When we get together, we'll still have a good debate.
Exactly, and that's I think what is really making this wonderful. Now, Karl, I really want to thank you because we've been talking close to 2 hours, to 1 hour and 40 minutes, something like that. It's been a wonderful time going in all kind of directions. If people want to contact you, what would be a good way to reach out to you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, KJ Scotland on LinkedIn.
I think that's the
That's
link.
the one. Yep. And then the other place would be my website, my blog. So that's availagility.co.uk. That's where so I think /blog is where the blog is. That's where I do a lot of writing, just trying to get ideas out of my head. One of these days I might get around to writing a book, but at the moment it's mostly blog posts, and trying to get into a discipline of doing one a week, although it's slipped a little bit recently. So Availagility has a lot of my writing and my ideas, but there's a contact form on there as well.
I will definitely add the link to the show notes. I didn't think about adding it here, but definitely worth following for people. So, but yeah, I really, like I said, a really wonderful time. Thank you very much for spending that time with us.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you. It was my pleasure as well. I was really looking forward to, and I'm happy that we could have done that. So
yeah, it's been good to catch up as well. It's been a long time since we since we last saw each other.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I hope indeed that we run into each other again at the physical conference, like you say. Yeah, I have no idea right now. I spend a lot of my time on this thing, less at conferences, but definitely sure that will catch up again in the future.
Hey, you need to build a conference around who is agile.
Yeah, well, this is even more work. That's a little bit. It's already a hard time to make sure I publish something every week, but right now it still is possible. But yeah, you never know. But thanks anyway for spending this time with you.
That's okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other agilists.